Hi everyone, Lindsay Gales again, and welcome to Module 2, where we dive into the resource. So without further ado, let's just walk through every sheet. But before I start, I do want to preface this by saying that you will be given a blank copy directly shared to you so that you can rename, change the colors, change the backgrounds, the font, really revamp it to fit your needs. So the first sheet that I have is the class roster. It is extremely important to make sure that you have a list of your students and your students' names for spelling purposes. I often really gravitate towards using this in the beginning of the school year. As the middle of the school year comes, you start to memorize how to spell student names. I also assign my students numbers. I have a lot of different supplies like headphones, for example, and scissors, glue that have numbers on them. So I make sure this is where I can go back and remember, oh, okay, so so-and-so student number 1, student number 2. Okay, again, this goes up till 20. You will be able to revamp this if you have a smaller amount of students or more students. Now, birthdays. Personally, birthdays is something that I really make sure I document at the start of the school year. So, writing down in this chart, and I also recommend writing it in your personal calendar so that you do not forget a student birthday, because that is the absolute worst. Now, this again is coming from a primary perspective where birthdays are extremely important in the classroom. As students get older, birthdays celebrations might not be as exciting and special in the classroom. Nope, I don't want to say that. Hi everyone, Lindsay Gales again, and welcome back to Module 2, where we are going to walk through a blank copy. Now, I want to preface this by saying you will be given a blank copy yourself that you can manipulate, change, and alter to fit your personal needs. So, without further ado, these are some ideas that you can utilize and you will have in your digital tracker, whether you choose to keep them or not. So, let's walk through. So, the first is the class roster. It is extremely important to make sure that you have all of your students arranged in your class roster so that you can keep track of how to spell your students' names. Now, this is truly coming from a primary standpoint. In my tracker, I only have about 20 spaces. If you are a high school teacher, you probably will have more 60 students that you need to make sure you keep track of all of the students that you have. Now, in my classroom, I also assign students a number so that certain supplies are assigned to each student. So this is a great way for me to remember and log back in and say, which student is number 1? Which student is number 5? I also have my birthday calendar. Again, coming from a primary perspective. Now, as a second grade teacher, I make sure that I not only input my birthdays into this document, but I also put it into my personal calendar. There's nothing worse than forgetting a student birthday. So I recommend tracking by date. So every month is here. Go in order by date. So the 5th, then the 8th, obviously in chronological order. And you might even want to put the age of your student as well. Now, allergies and medications, extremely important. This is a great one-stop shop to make sure that you have all of your allergies noted, any inhalers, medication, visits to the nurse that must be taken, and notes as well. So make sure if you go on field trips, if you need to bring inhalers or if you need to bring EpiPens. Sometimes students carry inhalers or EpiPens on their own. So this is a great way, especially as a CT classroom, for you to really communicate important information with every teacher that needs to know. Okay, one of the most important tabs is the parent contact tab. So this is a great way for you to keep track of all of your students, and then the various parents, guardians, relatives, their relationships, their emails, their phone numbers, their addresses, so that you can properly communicate with them. Personally, I also send out a survey at the beginning of the year where I ask my parents to tell me directly how they want to be communicated with. Do they definitely provide an email, but do they want to be contacted at work? Do they prefer a cell phone? Is there an appropriate time of day to call them? It's just great to make sure you have that information. It really builds a solid communication log for the rest of the school year. Now, dismissal list. So this is a great location for you to track what different students ride different buses, if they're pickups, if they're walkers, if they go to daycare, if they go to YMCA. This is extremely important to share with substitutes as well. And of course, dismissal can change. So I like to have a general daily dismissal list. I know I've had students in the past where on Mondays they go to their grandparents, on Wednesdays they go to a daycare provider. So just making sure that you communicate that information. This can be shared with any teacher that needs to use it. And because it's in this digital data tracker, it's very easy to copy, paste, and link to a substitute for the day. So now we get into more of the gradebook style. So I created a student checklist. Now the checklist is a blank canvas that you can utilize throughout the school year for anything. Like, for example, maybe you have a field trip coming up and you want to make sure that you have all of your permission slips. This is a great way for you to type in the assignment link. Okay, I want this to be the field trip form for our National Guard visit. And, oh, well, student number 3, student number 5, of course, the student names will be listed. They are missing, so you can even go in, which you'll see that I do. You can highlight, you know, what students are still missing. Those. You can also use the student checklist for different paperwork from the beginning of the year. I know we have emergency dismissal forms. So if we were to close school early, we need a second route. Where is the student going to be sent? Technology permission slips. So we have student Chromebooks that are one-to-one accessibility, but we need to make sure that parents sign a contract before. So do my students have those contracts? So this is a great log to just use. You can easily print this out as well if you just want to use it for just warm-ups and things that you're not necessarily grading. Which brings me to the gradebook. Now you're going to see that I created 2 grade books, one that is orange and one that is green. Colors, of course, can be revamped. So, for example, in my grade book, which we will be walking through together in a case study very shortly in the next couple of modules, you will notice that, again, I have the student numbers. You can easily input student names, and then you can go in and input your assignments. Now, I created checklists. Now, this is where it's going to change based on your grading scales. So, my school specifically, we go by a 1 to 4 scale, where 1 is not meeting the standard, 2 is approaching the standard, 3 is meeting the standard, and 4 is exceeding the standard. I even go as far as to color code. So, for example, I take the colors from our iReady diagnostic benchmarks, which I will show you in a second. So, iReady color codes. Students that are not meeting expectations are red, students that are meeting are green, and students that are approaching are yellow. Excuse me, that should have come before green. So it's just an easy way for me to see that color, to see that number, and say, oof, we need to work on this either after school or in small groups. Okay? So, for example, maybe you have a math gradebook and then a separate ELA gradebook. So that is why I wanted to give you two different gradebook options. Now, there's also a pacing guide in here. So, personally, I love to make sure, and I'm noticing here, I'm going to change this real quick, that we have some borders that we need to fix. There we are. Okay. So I really like to have a general pacing guide from the start of the year. So I will go a couple months at a time. Last year my school district was piloting two brand new programs for math and for ELA. This year I have a better idea of the pacing and what units or what modules did I need to spend more time on. So I will have a general pacing that I'll separate out by weeks. So I know, okay, in September, my target is to teach Unit 1 in math, and I'll even make sure in the calendar that I note any days off, any holidays, so that your pacing is on point. Now, this is something you're going to revisit many times throughout the year. And again, this is just a general pacing guide, so sometimes your pacing gets off out of place, and this is a great way to communicate to your other teachers what your goals are and what your targets are moving forward. It's always better to leave a little extra buffer room as well. So now we get to IEP goals. So specifically, this is more catered towards a CT classroom. So this is a great resource for your special education teacher to write down your IEP goals. What is the classification? What are needs that the general education teacher needs to provide? Any services that need to be provided? Any alerts? So this is the IEP. Then we walk into accommodations and modifications, which are for students that both have 504s and IEPs. Okay, so I have accommodations, modifications. I also have a separate testing accommodations section. So now services. As a CT classroom, I know I am going to have a lot of students being pulled out, being taken to different classrooms, working with various teachers. This could be OT, PT, speech, counseling. It could even be AIS. Maybe they're going to a reading teacher. Maybe they're working with a special education teacher in a separate classroom. This is a great way for you to track that. And then personally, I recommend whatever plan book you use. Personally, I use planbook.com. Take the schedule and input it. There's a way that you can input it so it shows up every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, every Thursday, every Friday. So it's automatically there. And then on the days maybe someone is absent, you can easily erase, but it'll show up every day. And this makes sure that you do not forget. I also recommend setting your phone. I know a lot of teachers that set timers to make sure, oh, it's 11 o'clock, it's time for your student to go to speech, so that you aren't getting that phone call of where's my student, can you send that student, and then it kind of displaces your instruction. So now the iReady reading diagnostic results and math diagnostic results, this is directly catered towards the resources that I use. Maybe you have a different benchmark system. Personally, my school, we do our benchmark testing in September. So that's the beginning data. January is that middle of the year data, and June is the end of the year. So you have your beginning, middle, and end of the year. There's a place for you to put the student name and the score. And again, I recommend color coding. So if your student is not meeting expectations, you can easily highlight and know that's a student you have to work with. And then in a minute, you'll see